And we have like people here that do have experiences with creating state management based on the RxJS. In the listeners, I can see Florian, which is the author of Mini Rx, and Brecht here today is also author of his like really small state management way, pure RxJS state management way. So Brecht, I'm wondering, what do you think about this?
Yeah, I think so. So RxJS is a little bit complex and it's hard to learn. But the big problem that Signals is solving is like 6 months ago, you that has written RxJS code or your colleague that has written RxJS code. That's when it becomes hard, right? Like not understanding RxJS, even though it has a steep learning curve and there's like all these things like schedulers and multicasting and all that stuff. Um, but the problem is mostly like understanding like reactive flows, and I think that will be a lot simplified by Signals. And indeed, I've written this small file actually that is called observable state, and basically it's a behavior subject that uses a queue scheduler and make sure that you don't have to do error handling or you don't have to do like multicasting and subscriptions, all that stuff. And I think that's the same thing that Rx Angler tries to solve, and the same thing that NGRX tries to solve with the store, but also with the component store. So the principles are the same. And I was wondering, like observable state, does it still make sense to have it if signals come? Because I refactored an application from observable state to signals, and I didn't really have the need for it anymore. But then afterwards, I've created a signal state, which is only 80 lines of code, but it's just a more opinionated way of handling component state. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I'm thinking like definitely there will be libraries built upon these signals. But I'm thinking like the popularity of frameworks like NGRX and other state management frameworks are really there because they want to have an opinionated way of using RxJS without using it directly, and making sure that if you have a team of junior developers, everybody's working the same way. So I think that's also the reason why they introduced signals, right? Because the RxJS learning curve or understanding someone else RxJS code is kind of hard. So yeah, I'm definitely interested what's going to happen in that area.
Yeah, sounds like we are all pretty excited at this point. I'm wondering, Thomas, you because you are a heavy user of NGRX and you are advocating for the NGRX. I'm wondering what's your opinion on this.
Yeah. So of course, like there are different kinds of application which have different needs and different teams with different level of expertise. So that's all good. And yeah, I do prefer like this structured approach, which like this kind of popular library gives you. And especially with regards to that RFC for the NGRX signal store, which is then kind of like implemented using signals, I really liked how the way they, at least in the RFC, presented the interop with RxJS, because as it turns out, RxJS is not really useful to like select stuff, especially if you have signals, right? But it still can be very useful for a more complex asynchronous orchestration when you are firing multiple requests. Maybe you want to cancel them, maybe you want to batch them, maybe you want to wait till the first one finished before you fire another one. And that's exactly the use case where RxJS shines. And that's exactly the use case which is solved by the very dedicated part of the NGRX, which is the effects, right? So whenever you need to solve this kind of things, you are solving them in NGRX effects. So, and as it turns out, in that, at least in that RFC for the signal store, they of course also introduce again the first class support for the side effects. And there they had like some kind of helper, which was either like Rx or something else. I don't really remember exactly the syntax. And you elegantly could like switch from signals to RxJS for a little stream, which could handle that logic which can only be handled with ease using those operators, or you would have to implement something complicated on the side, which you don't want to do. And then once you are done, you come back into the world of the signal store, right? So it's very similar to what Angular team has done with to signal to observable, but as a part of that NGRX signal store. And I find this like a best of both worlds.
Yeah, yeah, definitely valuable input on here. So it's so far it sounds like we are all pretty excited about all of this. And when I'm reading the summary that Alex did on the Angular signals RFC, and the first thing that pop ups in the additional feedback, I'm not going to dwell too much on the technical details that are there because it can change at any point. But in general, community seems to be worried that having like both signals and zone reactivity in Angular can create issues going forward. So are we concerned about this? What do you guys think? How is this going to unfold? Because it might actually do create confusion, especially for newcomers and people joining, having at their disposal the signal way and the zone way, and mixing all of that together might end up not good. So I'm wondering what you guys think about this. Anyone can start, really.
There I would like to start because I have like also a bit of like a personal experience where I mean signals are just coming like the little part of signals will be coming out now in the 16, right? But then we have something like Angular standalone, which like the was available as a preview from 14, I think, and then 15 was kind of released. And basically in a couple of various different projects, I tried to use them at various capacity from like generating a new project using a standalone to like converting project to standalone to adding a new feature in existing project to standalone and stuff like that. And there I can say I had like this first hand experience with a bit of a confusion or let's say inability find out relevant information in the docs with ease, which, for example, led to an effort where I tried to migrate like a universal app to standalone, and I did it only to realize at the end that you still cannot do it like fully with like that base setup for like the SSR for the universal, right? And this should be fixed in 16. So this brings me to a little bit of a worry that I mean, this like small step rollout is cool to get information and get feedback, but at the same time, it can be frustrating for people, especially from this kind of angles, when something which you would expect to work doesn't work yet, or is not really documented that well. So it's kind of like you get surprises which are not so pleasant. Another thing was, for example, with the standalone, where you can generate like a new component using schematics, which might standalone or even like some if you have some UI based tooling. But as it turned out, at least still like it should be also fixed in 16. So that's like two major version after. Only in 16 it will be possible to generate like the new application standalone. So you get like this base setup with like a bootstrap application and providers from and stuff like that, right? So and this I see as like a risk that you come up with this new thing, people want to try it, and then they try it, and then they find all these rough edges because it's not really finished yet. So that's from my perspective a little bit of a risk, which also then was a bit disappointing with the standalone, even though I'm really looking forward to 16 when this all should be taken care of.